"Hey, you can't fish here!" The shout cracked across the water, sharp enough to spook the heron on the far bank. I kept my eyes on the line, steady, calm. She marched down the dock, HOA badge swinging like it gave her power. I said, "Pack it up." This lake belongs to the association. I reeled in, slow, let the silence stretch. Then I stood, sun glinting off the badge on my chest. "Ma'am," I said, voice low, "I'm the state wildlife officer, and I own this lake. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Ryan, and I've spent the last 12 years as a state wildlife officer. Most people think that means I just check fishing licenses and chase the occasional poacher. And sure, that's part of it. But for me, it's always been more than a badge, more than a job. It started when I was a kid. My grandfather bought a small slice of land out here in the late 60s, just a stretch of forest and a quiet lake that caught the morning light like glass. He used to take me out in his old aluminum boat, the two of us casting lines into the still water. He'd tell me, nature takes care of us if we take care of her. At the time, I thought he was just trying to make fishing sound poetic. But as I got older, I realized he was handing me the family's creed. When my dad passed, I doubled down on that creed. I went to school for wildlife biology, then entered the state's conservation department. I learned the laws that keep ecosystems balanced, the science behind water quality, the signs of poaching, pollution, or invasive species. My badge isn't just metal, it's a promise, a responsibility. And that lake, it's more than water to me. My grandfather left it in my name with a simple request: protect it. Let people enjoy it, but never let anyone take advantage of it. He stocked it with bass and bluegill, built the dock with his own hands, and used to joke that the water was his church. When I walk down to the shore in the early morning, mist curling over the glassy surface, I can still hear him humming an old country tune. It's my reminder of him, of family, of what matters. So, when the HOA started sniffing around, I didn't think much of it. This neighborhood had sprung up around the edges of the lake, houses lined like teeth around the shoreline. People came and went, but the HOA, they were always there. Meetings about grass height, mailbox colors, what kind of flowers you could plant in your front yard. Petty stuff. Annoying, but not dangerous. At least, not until Sandra took over. Sandra had moved in about a year earlier, fresh from some upscale community in the city. She was tall, sharp, always dressed like she was heading to a board meeting. You could practically smell the perfume before she turned the corner. She introduced herself to the neighborhood with a smile, but it was the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first I thought she was just another busybody. She sent out letters about garbage cans being left out an extra hour, about kids riding bikes too fast on the sidewalks, about the wrong kind of patio furniture. She cited bylaws like scripture. I didn't take it personally. I didn't live under her jurisdiction. My land was older than the HOA itself, carved out long before the neighborhood was even a thought. My driveway cut through their gates, but my property, my lake, and my family's little cabin, completely separate. But I underestimated how much Sandra hated not having control. She wasn't just the type who wanted order. She wanted obedience. She wanted to be the one giving orders, the one everyone else had to answer to. And in her eyes, my lake was a problem, a piece of the neighborhood she couldn't police. That's when she started showing up. Sometimes it was little things, standing on the dock with her arms crossed, pretending to inspect something. Other times, she'd leave notes on my truck telling me to stop trespassing on my own land. She hated that my family and I fished from the dock without HOA approval. At first, I tried to laugh it off. I'd spent my whole career de-escalating confrontations with angry hunters or landowners. Compared to a woman with a clipboard, how bad could it be? But then I noticed my wife flinching every time she saw Sandra's SUV creeping by our driveway. My son stopped wanting to go down to the lake because the angry lady will yell again. That's when it stopped being funny. That's when it became personal. Because this wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about my family's peace. It was about my grandfather's lake, and it was about a woman who thought her made-up rules gave her the right to bully everyone around her. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some neighbor with a fishing pole. I was sworn to protect this land, to protect the water, to protect the wildlife. and if Sandra wanted to fight over my lake. Well, she was about to find out that I've never been afraid of a fight. At first, I thought Sandra's antics were just part of the HOA game. You know the type. People who get drunk on a little bit of authority, who believe their clipboard makes them a cop. But it didn't take long to realize this wasn't about rules or appearances. It was about control. And Sandra craved control like oxygen. The first time I noticed it was with the Johnson kids. They were 10 and 12, riding their bikes around the cul-de-sac after dinner, laughing, racing each other. A week later, the family got a letter in the mail. Violation, reckless cycling, safety hazard, fine, $50. The HOA didn't even have a rule about bikes. Sandra had just invented one. Then came the lawns. One of the older veterans, Mr. Coleman, had a bum knee. He couldn't mow his yard every week. Sometimes it went 10 days, maybe 12, before his grandson came over to help. Sandra sent him a violation notice, complete with photos she'd taken from her SUV, zoomed in on the blades of grass like crime scene evidence. Fine. $100. Mr. Coleman tried to explain. She cut him off, saying if he couldn't keep up with community standards, maybe this wasn't the place for him. That's when I realized she didn't enforce rules equally. She enforced them selectively. The Parkers, wealthy couple, brand new house, threw parties every other weekend. Music blasting, cars double parked on the street, no violation notices, no fines. Sandra even showed up to sip wine on their back deck. But if the single mom down the street left her trash can out an extra hour, violation, fine, warning of lien. It wasn't just about the rules. It was about who she could push around and who she wanted to impress. And then she set her sights on me. It started with little jabs, notes left on my truck windshield, parking not permitted overnight in community areas. I wasn't parked in a community area. It was my driveway, my land. Next, she tried the noise angle. My son and I were fixing the outboard motor one Saturday, laughing, tools clanking, music low on the radio. A white SUV rolled past, slow, windows down. The next day, a letter in the mailbox. Noise violation. Unauthorized mechanical work visible from the street. I crumpled it up and tossed it. What was she going to do, fine me for fixing my own boat? But Sandra didn't just rely on paper. She was everywhere. I'd see her SUV idling at the corner when my wife took our son to school. She'd walk her dog past my dock 3 times in an hour, glaring like a hawk every time we had lines in the water. Once, I caught her standing on the edge of the lake at dawn, just watching, arms folded. It was creepy, like she was trying to remind us she was always near, always watching. Neighbors whispered about her too. Mrs. Lee said she caught Sandra peeking over her fence with binoculars to check her garden. The Harris family found an anonymous complaint filed against them for illegal chickens, even though all they had were 3 parakeets in a cage. Sandra was weaponizing the HOA like a scalpel, cutting into people's lives in ways too small to fight legally, but too sharp to ignore. And when people pushed back, she retaliated. One neighbor spoke up at a meeting, questioning the new decorative guidelines Sandra pushed through without a vote. 2 weeks later, he got a citation for an unsafe retaining wall. Funny thing was, his wall had stood for 15 years without issue. Suddenly it was structurally compromised. He spent thousands repairing something that didn't need fixing, just to keep her off his back. I started keeping notes, dates, times, the exact wording of her letters, the way she bent rules to fit her mood. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the information yet, but I knew this. It wasn't just pettiness anymore. It was a pattern, and like any predator, she was testing her prey. The smaller families, the ones with less money, less influence, she bullied relentlessly. Those with clout, she courted them, protected them. That way, when accusations flew, she could always say, "See? I don't target everyone. Look how friendly I am with the Parkers." It was gaslighting on a neighborhood scale. But the lake was different. The lake was mine. And that's why she hated me most of all. Every time she looked at me with that fake smile and steel in her eyes, I could see it. She wanted my lake under her rules. She wanted to claim it as a community resource. I remember one conversation clear as day. I was hauling gear down to the dock when she strolled up, arms folded, clipboard in hand. It'd be better for everyone if the HOA managed this lake. We could regulate fishing, swimming hours, set safety guidelines. I stared at her. This lake doesn't belong to the HOA. Her smile tightened. Well, we'll see about that. The threat wasn't subtle, and it wasn't empty. Because over the next few weeks, the pressure grew. Anonymous complaints about trespassing fishermen. Strange cars parking near the shoreline at night. More notes, more warnings, more invented rules. Sandra wasn't just abusing power. She was building a case step by step to try and take what was mine. And the scariest part? She was smart, calculated. She didn't scream, didn't rage in public. She played the long game, planting seeds of doubt, whispering to board members, spinning stories so she always looked like the reasonable one. That's why she was dangerous. Not because she was loud, not because she was obvious, but because she was patient. She wanted my lake. She wanted my family gone. And every move she made told me she wasn't going to stop until she got it. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of quiet morning where you can almost convince yourself that life is normal. My wife was making pancakes, my son was out by the dock with his little rod, and I was tightening a loose hinge on the screen door. That's when the letter came. Not a folded HOA notice. Not a polite warning slipped in the mailbox. This one was taped to my front door with blue painter's tape, dead center so we couldn't miss it. Big, bold letters across the top. Final warning. I peeled it off and read. Unauthorized use of lake property. Continuous trespassing. If activity does not cease immediately, the HOA will pursue legal action and fines up to $1,000 per day. My hands tightened on the paper. The HOA didn't own this lake. They didn't even own an inch of my shoreline. This wasn't just wrong, it was intimidation. Written like a court order, stamped with her name, President Sandra L. Greaves. When I walked back inside, my wife saw the look on my face. What is it? I handed her the paper. She read, her, mouth tightening with every line. When she finished, she set it down like it was poison. She can't do this, she whispered. But the tremor in her voice said she wasn't so sure. My son came in a minute later, barefoot and grinning, holding up a bluegill he'd just caught. He froze when he saw us. What's wrong? I forced a smile. Nothing, buddy. Just grown-up stuff. But it wasn't nothing. That letter was the first strike, and I knew Sandra had written it to scare us, to plant fear in my wife's heart, to make my kid wonder if we even belonged here. It worked. That night, my wife asked if we should stop fishing for a while. Just until this blows over, she said. She wouldn't look me in the eye when she asked. She loved the lake as much as I did, but the thought of lawyers, fines, legal battles, it gnawed at her. I shook my head. If we give her an inch, she'll take the whole shoreline. But saying it didn't ease the weight in my chest, and Sandra wasn't finished. A few days later, I came home from patrol and saw my wife standing by the window, pale. She pointed outside. Parked across from our driveway was a black sedan. Windows tinted, engine idling. It didn't move for half an hour. When it finally did, the driver lowered the window just enough for us to see the HOA sticker on the dashboard. Sandra had sent someone to watch us. That's when things shifted inside the house. My wife started double-checking locks every night. My son stopped sleeping through the night. He'd wake up crying, saying he saw shadows at the dock. I tried to tell him it was just his imagination, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. The emotional cost bled into everything. Dinners went cold while we sat in silence, ears straining at every car that slowed near the house. My wife lost weight, pushing food around her plate while insisting she wasn't hungry. My son stopped asking to go fishing altogether. The lake that had once been our sanctuary now felt like a stage where Sandra pulled the strings. The worst moment came one evening when we were coming back from town. As we pulled into the driveway, headlights flared in the mirror. A car tailed us all the way in and stopped at the curb. The door opened and out stepped Sandra herself, clipboard in hand, lips pressed in that fake little smile. She walked right up to the truck before I even killed the engine. "Evening," she said brightly. "I'm afraid there have been multiple reports of unauthorized fishing on HOA property. If it continues, we'll be forced to escalate." I opened the door slowly, placing myself between her and my family. "This isn't your property, Sandra." "It never has been." Her smile didn't fade. That's a matter for the courts, isn't it? She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You'll be surprised how fast a community can turn against you when they think you're the problem. Then she turned on her heel, got back in her SUV, and drove off, leaving dust in her wake. That night, my wife broke down. She sat on the edge of the bed, head in her hands, sobbing. What if she really takes us to court? What if we lose the lake? What if... I knelt in front of her, gripping her hands. She can't take what isn't hers, and I won't let her scare us out of our home. But even as I said it, I felt the tension pulling us tighter and tighter, like a rope about to snap. The letter had been the first strike. The surveillance, the intimidation, the late-night threats, all of it was meant to weaken us, to make us doubt ourselves, to make us crack before the real fight even began. Sandra wasn't just testing boundaries anymore. She was crossing them, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next move she made was going to be worse, much worse. The first strike rattled us, but the breaking point, the moment Sandra went too far, came late one Thursday night. The air was heavy, humid, the kind of night where the crickets never stop. My wife had finally drifted into a fragile sleep, and my son was curled against his blanket fort, flashlight still clutched in his hand. I was in the living room, staring out at the lake through the glass door, trying to convince myself we'd weather the storm. Then the pounding started, not on the front door, on the side of the house. 3 sharp bangs, then silence. I froze, every nerve alive. Another bang, this time against the back deck. The sound of boots on wood. A man's laugh, low, ugly. My heart kicked. I grabbed the flashlight and the sidearm I kept in the safe. I flicked on the backlight. 2 figures stood on the dock, leather vests catching the glare. They weren't fishing. They weren't neighbors. They were strangers, biker types, the kind of men Sandra would never let pass the gates in broad daylight. One of them lifted a beer bottle, smashed it against the dock post, and shouted toward the house, "This ain't your water anymore!" My wife bolted upright, screaming my name. My son cried out from his room. The sound of fear in their voices hit me harder than the pounding on the walls. I leveled the flashlight beam, gun in my other hand, and shouted, "You're trespassing! Get off my property, now!" The men laughed. One kicked over my tackle box, spilling lures and line across the dock. The other started toward the house, swaggering slow, daring me to move. And then headlights appeared, Sandra's SUV. She didn't step out. She just sat there at the edge of the cul-de-sac, her face pale blue from the dashboard lights, watching. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. My wife was on the phone with 911, voice shaking as she gave the address. My son sobbed into her chest. I held my ground, shouting again, "Leave now! Police are on their way." The bikers spat curses, smashed another bottle on the deck, and finally retreated toward the road. One of them leaned close to the window as they passed, sneering, "Better pack up, Ranger! This ain't your lake anymore." They roared off into the night. Sandra's SUV tailed them, slow, deliberate, like a shepherd guiding her dogs. When the police arrived, the bikers were gone, and Sandra was nowhere to be seen. The officers walked the dock, saw the broken glass, the scattered gear. They took statements, nodding gravely, but without names or plates. There wasn't much they could do. Still, I noticed something they didn't. The whole thing, the pounding, the dock, even Sandra's SUV, had been caught on camera. A few months earlier, after Sandra's first surveillance games, I'd installed a pair of trail cameras around the property. Motion-triggered, high-definition, silent. One was mounted on the dock post, nearly invisible. Another covered the driveway. When I pulled the footage, my hands trembled. There it was, 2 bikers smashing glass, shouting threats. Sandra's SUV idling, her face lit just enough by the glow of her console to be recognizable. The timestamp synced exactly with my wife's 911 call. It was all there. But in that moment, the evidence didn't feel like victory. It felt like ash. Because the damage was already done. My wife didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the kitchen with every light on, staring at the back door, flinching at every creak. My son asked if we could go stay at Grandma's, just until the scary people go away. And me? I sat on the porch with my badge in one hand and the footage in the other, fury boiling inside me. Sandra had crossed a line. This wasn't letters or notes anymore. This was violence, intimidation by proxy, a direct attack on my family. And the way she just sat there, watching like a director behind the scenes, that chilled me more than anything, because it meant she wasn't afraid of consequences. She thought she was untouchable, but she'd made one mistake. She forgot who I am. I'm not just some guy with a fishing pole. I'm a wildlife officer trained to document, to build cases, to gather evidence so airtight that no one can wriggle free. And now, I had the beginnings of a case against her. The next day, I backed up the footage on 3 different drives. I made copies of the 911 call log. I even took photos of the broken glass before sweeping it off the dock. I knew what Sandra's next move would be. She'd try to twist the story, flip it back on me, maybe even claim I'd threatened her guests. That was her pattern: create chaos, then hide behind the rules. But this time, she'd underestimated me, because now I had proof, and proof was the one thing she couldn't spin. The break-in, the bikers, the SUV, it was the beginning of her downfall. I just had to hold my ground long enough to bring the truth into the light. The morning after the break-in, I stood on the dock staring at the scattered glass. The water rippled under the rising sun, innocent as ever. But for me, the lake didn't feel safe anymore. Not until I proved beyond a doubt what really happened here. So I began the investigation, not the official kind, not yet. This wasn't about my badge. This was about my family, my home. And to protect both, I needed a case so solid even Sandra couldn't twist it. The first step was the cameras. I pulled the SD card from the dock post and slid it into my laptop. The footage popped up, grainy at first, then sharpening into crystal clarity. The 2 bikers swaggering onto the dock, the bottle smashing, my voice shouting from the porch. And then, the most damning part, Sandra's SUV idling at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Her face glowed faintly from the dashboard screen. She wasn't surprised, she wasn't scared, she was watching. I paused, rewound, zoomed. I wanted every detail locked down. The timestamp read 11:43 p.m. Next, I pulled the 911 call record, my wife's voice shaking, reporting the trespassers, logged at 11:44 p.m. Side by side, it told the story plain as day. The bikers arrived, Sandra watched, we called for help. I didn't need fancy legal terms. I just needed the truth, lined up so clear a child could see it. Then I went to work on the other camera, the one pointed at the driveway, and there it was, Sandra's SUV creeping down the street hours before the incident, circling like a shark. She wasn't a bystander. She was the one pulling strings. I burned the footage to 3 separate drives and hid them in different spots around the cabin. One in my gun safe, one in the glove box of my truck, one mailed to my brother across town. If Sandra thought intimidation would make me back down, she didn't know how far I'd go to protect my family. But footage alone wouldn't be enough. People like Sandra survive by spinning stories, turning neighbors against each other until no one knows what's true. So I started gathering witnesses. The first was Mr. Coleman, the veteran she'd fined for his lawn. I caught him outside, cane in one hand, watering can in the other. When I asked if he'd noticed anything strange that night, he sighed. Strange? Son, that woman's been strange since she moved in. But yeah, I saw her. SUV parked right out front, lights off. She was there before the ruckus started. I jotted it down. A witness statement. Simple, direct. Then came Mrs. Lee. She admitted she'd seen the bikers earlier that day, hanging around Sandra's driveway, talking in hushed voices. I thought it was odd, she whispered, glancing around like Sandra might be hiding in the azaleas. They didn't look like the type you invite for tea. Piece by piece, the puzzle fit together. Sandra hadn't just tolerated those men. She'd invited them. But the biggest crack came from inside the HOA itself. One of the board members, a soft-spoken man named David, stopped me on my morning run. He looked over his shoulder before speaking. Look, I can't be seen talking to you, but I thought you should know. Sandra's been pushing the board to declare the lake common property. Says it would give the HOA the right to regulate it. I clenched my fists. She knows damn well the deed is in my name. David nodded. She does. But she told the board, you've been threatening neighbors, that you fired a gun last night to scare them off. She's building a narrative. There it was, the smear campaign. Sandra wasn't just trying to steal the lake, she was trying to paint me as dangerous. What she didn't realize was that the cameras had captured every second. No gunshots, no threats, just me defending my home while her thugs smashed bottles. I thanked David and jogged home, the fury building with every step. Sandra's empire wasn't built on truth. It was built on fear, manipulation, and lies. And now, for the first time, the lies were cracking. By the end of the week, I had a binder full of evidence. Video footage, bikers on the dock, Sandra's SUV watching, 911 call log, timestamp matched to the footage, witness statements, neighbors confirming Sandra's presence, her connection to the bikers, legal documents, the deed to the lake, signed by my grandfather decades before the HOA ever existed. I spread it all out on the kitchen table one night, the lamplight casting shadows across the pages. My wife stood beside me, arms folded tight. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked. I looked at the footage paused on Sandra's face, cold and calculating in the SUV. It's more than enough. But it has to be revealed at the right moment, because this wasn't just about proving she lied. It was about exposing her so thoroughly, so publicly, that no one could defend her. The HOA board, the neighbors she bullied, even the police who'd been fed her stories. They all needed to see the truth with their own eyes. And soon, they would. Because the cracks were already spreading. I heard whispers at the mailbox, saw skeptical looks at the grocery store. People who once nodded politely at Sandra now crossed the street when she walked by. She thought she was invincible. She thought no one would stand up to her. But the tide was turning, and I was ready. The evidence was locked, loaded, and waiting. All that remained was the showdown. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, neighbors shifting nervously, clutching copies of the agenda Sandra had mailed out. At the front sat the HOA board, their expressions tight. And in the center, standing tall behind the podium, was Sandra. She looked calm, too calm, clipboard in hand, smile painted on, as if she already knew she'd won. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice honeyed. "We're here tonight to discuss the ongoing disturbances at the lake. As your HOA president, it's my duty to ensure safety and harmony in our community. Unfortunately, one property owner has repeatedly endangered. Both her eyes flicked to me. A few heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd. Sandra pressed on, flipping a page with theatrical flair. We've received multiple reports of aggressive behavior, unlawful fishing, and even the discharge of a firearm to intimidate residents. These actions not only violate community standards, they jeopardize our children's safety." My jaw clenched. There it was, the narrative she'd been spinning. I could see a few neighbors' faces tighten, uncertain. The smear was working. Sandra leaned forward, lowering her voice to a concerned tone. "We cannot allow one man's selfishness to endanger what we've built here. The board will be voting tonight to designate the lake as common property under HOA authority. That way, we can enforce rules and restore peace." The room buzzed. Some nodded, others frowned. My wife gripped my hand, whispering, "Now." I stood. The room hushed. Sandra's smile faltered, just slightly. "May I address the board?" I asked. Sandra tilted her head, that condescending smile snapping back into place. "Briefly," she said, "but understand, this isn't personal. It's about the rules." I walked to the front, a binder in my hand. I set it on the podium, the thud echoing. Then I looked out at my neighbors, the people she'd been manipulating for months. "You've heard Sandra's story," I said evenly. "Now, let me show you the truth." I opened the binder, pulled out a set of printed stills. I held up the first, the bikers on my dock, glass shattering midair. Gasps rippled through the room. "This was last Thursday night. 2 men trespassed onto my property. They vandalized my dock, shouted threats at my family." I held up the next still, Sandra's SUV, headlights glowing, parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac. "And here's who was watching the entire time." Murmurs surged. A board member leaned forward, squinting. Sandra shot to her feet. "That proves nothing?" "Coincidence. I was patrolling the neighborhood." I clicked a remote. On the projector behind me, the video played. Crystal clear. Bikers smashing bottles, shouting, "This ain't your water anymore." And there, at the corner, Sandra's SUV, her face visible in the glow of her dashboard. The timestamp ticked at the bottom, 11:43 p.m. Then, I held up the 911 call log. And here's the record of my wife's emergency call, logged at 11:44 p.m. Exactly when this footage was taken. The room was dead silent. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, Sandra wasn't protecting this community. She orchestrated this attack. Neighbors turned, whispering. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others glared at her openly. Sandra's mask cracked. "Lies!" she snapped. "Fabrications? You've tampered with this video." I pulled out the deed, yellowed with age, signed in my grandfather's handwriting. I laid it flat on the podium. "This is the deed to the lake filed in 1972. My family's property long before this HOA ever existed. Every lawyer in the county will confirm it. This lake does not, and never will, belong to the HOAA board member leaned over to examine the document. He looked up, pale. "It's legitimate." That was the tipping point. Voices rose from the crowd. "She set him up. She's been targeting people for months. My kids weren't safe because of her." Sandra tried to shout over them. "Order! This is out of order. I am the president," but her voice was drowned out. Neighbors stood, one after another, speaking out. Mrs. Lee told how she'd seen the bikers at Sandra's house. Mr. Coleman described her SUV parked outside that night. Even David, the quiet board member, spoke up. "I warned you all," he said, voice shaking. "Sandra has been pushing for control of the lake. She's lied to this board, and now you see how far she's willing to go." The gavel pounded. Another board member stood. "Effective immediately, we are calling for a vote of no confidence." Hands shot into the air. Nearly unanimous. Sandra's face blanched. She tried to gather her papers, but they slipped from her shaking hands. For the first time since she'd moved in, her composure cracked completely. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "All of you." But no one was listening anymore. Two officers entered the room, the same ones who'd taken our statement after the break-in. I'd given them the footage earlier that day. Now, with the community as witness, they stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Sandra sputtered, but the officers flanked her, guiding her toward the exit. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Relief. Neighbors hugged, clapped, whispered, "Finally." As she was led out, her clipboard clattered to the floor. And just like that, her reign was over. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest eased. The lake was safe. My family was safe. And Sandra, the woman who thought she was untouchable, had been exposed in front of everyone. But this wasn't just my victory. It was the neighborhood's. The moment fear was broken and truth finally stood tall. The morning after the showdown, the lake was still. No broken glass, no SUVs lurking at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Just sunlight spilling across the water, painting the surface gold. For the first time in months, my family breathed easy. My son tugged at my sleeve. "Can we go fishing again?" His voice carried none of the fear it had before, just pure excitement. My wife nodded, smiling through the kind of tears that only come when the weight finally lifts. We carried our rods to the dock together. When my son cast his line, the splash was small, but it sounded like freedom. That was the moment I knew Sandra had lost more than power. She had lost her grip on us. But it wasn't just about my family. Word of what happened spread fast. Neighbors who'd once whispered in fear now stood tall. People started waving again, stopping to talk, sharing stories of what she had done to them. And for the first time, they weren't ashamed. They weren't hiding. That week, the board voted in new leadership. David, the quiet one who'd found his voice, was elected president. His first words, "No more fear, no more manipulation. This HOA will serve the community, not control it." The relief in the room was palpable. And with Sandra gone, the neighborhood came alive. Mrs. Lee planted new flowers in her garden without worrying someone would measure the color. The Johnson kids rode their bikes until dark, laughter echoing down the cul-de-sac. Mr. Coleman sat in his lawn chair, flag waving proudly above his porch, knowing no one would fine him for a patch of grass. As for us, we wanted to mark the moment. My wife suggested something simple, something lasting. Together, we planted a young oak tree at the edge of the driveway, its roots pressing into soil that had seen too much fear. "This tree will outlive all of us," I said, patting the dirt around it, "and no one will ever tape a threat to this trunk." My son hung a little sign on it: home, safe, ours. Every time I walked past, I felt the weight lift a little more. The lake itself seemed to reflect the change. Neighbors came down to fish, to picnic, to skip stones with their kids. Not under HOA regulations, not under watchful eyes, but freely, respectfully, as it was meant to be. One Saturday, I repainted our old mailbox. For months, I hadn't cared if the paint peeled, but now each brushstroke felt like reclaiming something stolen. By the time I finished, it gleamed bright white against the afternoon sun, a symbol of starting fresh. The dock got repairs too. Neighbors volunteered boards, nails, even a set of hands. We fixed what had been broken, not just in wood, but in spirit. And when it was done, I stood on it with my family, watching the sun dip low, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. That's the legacy of this fight. Not just the one corrupt HOA president was exposed, not just that my family kept our lake, but that a whole neighborhood remembered it didn't have to live in fear. Sandra thought control was power, but the truth? Power is people standing together. Power is sunlight on the water, laughter echoing across porches, neighbors helping neighbors. And as I sat on that dock, my son leaning against me, line dancing in the water, I knew my grandfather would be proud. I'd kept his promise. I'd protected the lake. I'd protected my family. And we'd planted something stronger than fear. Roots that would last for generations. So, if you're watching this and you've ever been bullied by an HOA, if you've ever felt powerless against people who twist rules to their advantage, hear this. You are not alone. Stand your ground, gather your proof, tell your story. Because the truth has a way of shining through, just like sunlight over still water. And if you've ever had an HOA abuse power, subscribe now and share your story in the comments. Let's make sure no one else fights this battle alone.